So let's talk about what are amphetamines. So these are a group or a family of synthetic or human-made stimulant drugs. And although all types of amphetamines have similar chemical properties and effects, they vary in the way that they're manufactured and their strength. The main types are amphetamine, dextroamphetamine, and methamphetamine. And then some types of these amphetamines, they are or they have been available by prescription to treat illnesses. So they have different trade names like Adderall, Benzedrine, Dexedrine, Methadrine. But amphetamines, they're also used recreationally. So in other words, they're used to get high rather than any medical reason. Some street or slang names for amphetamines are going to include speed, whiz, uppers, crank, crystal, amp, meth, base, billy, beanies, sulfate, and one that's commonly known by is ice. So street amphetamines, they're usually going to come in an off-white, yellowish, or pinkish powder, or maybe like a putty-like substance known as base. And these powders may only be about 20% pure. So in other words, it's only about 1/5 of the powder may be amphetamine. The rest could be anything from dried baby formula to anything like rat poison. This means that any person who takes that drug is also risking the effects of the additives, any one of which could be poison. So sometimes amphetamines, they're mixed with other stimulants like caffeine. And of course, this is also dangerous since it's going to increase that stimulant effect and it's going to put a strain on the body's organs. And people who use street amphetamines are also at risk of accidental overdose. So let's say that they always buy from the same person and the drug is always about the same strength, for example. So 30% amphetamine, 70% relatively harmless additive, like baby formula or something. And then one day, maybe they buy the drug from a different person. So let's assume that the additive is still harmless, but this time what they buy is going to be 85% amphetamine and 15% additive. And suddenly their body gets nearly 3 times the amount that they're used to. So as you can see, there's a lot of dangers here. And then base tends to be stronger than the amphetamine powder, which is often only about 50% pure. Methamphetamine, which is a very strong form of that drug, can be up to 97% pure. And it's going to come in white powder or crystals, which is what we call ice, or pills. And these powders, they can be snorted, sniffed up the nose, smoked, inhaled. It can be heated on foil to produce a vapor that's breathed in, or dissolved and injected intravenously directly into the vein. Base amphetamine, this is often swallowed, but it apparently tastes disgusting. And because of that terrible bitter taste, it's usually bombed or wrapped in a cigarette paper and then swallowed. One of the methods that people use to take amphetamines is to heat the drug in a glass tube so that they can inhale the vapor. Some people call this a chalet. So going back to the different doses, the powders that are sold as amphetamines are bulked out with differing amounts of additives. So as you can see, 70% additive, 30% amphetamine, or 85% amphetamine and 15% additive. And although you may not know much about amphetamines, you probably have heard some of their widely used street names like speed. And this nickname describes the effect that the amphetamine has on the person who takes it. It just speeds up everything. So, as with any drug, the effects of taking amphetamines are going to vary from person to person, obviously, but generally, people who take amphetamines, they're likely to experience increased blood pressure, faster breathing and heart rate, and a feeling of boundless energy. They might also become talkative and restless and fidgety. This drug can give a sudden rush of pleasure. It's going to give you that sense of euphoria and feeling of general well being. The user is often going to feel alert and full of confidence and be able to achieve pretty much anything. How quickly and how strongly these effects are felt is going to depend largely on how the drugs were taken. So, injecting straight into the bloodstream is going to produce almost instant effects. This is the same as if amphetamine is smoked, that then the drug is going to enter the bloodstream via the lungs, and then it's going to be carried to the heart, from which it's pumped around the body, and then it reaches the brain within seconds, and that's going to cause this intense rush on the user. The effects from snorting can take just a few minutes to kick in. This is because the drug enters the bloodstream via the membranes of the nose. And then someone who swallows amphetamines is going to feel the effects after about 15 to 20 minutes because it's going to go through the digestive system. Taking amphetamines it can cause some really unpleasant effects. So for example, you might get dry mouth, increased sweating, headaches, anxiety, and insomnia. Some people suffer from panic attacks during which they suddenly feel anxious or frightened. They may sweat or shiver and start to breathe very quickly. This is called hyperventilating. Others find that amphetamines make them irritable and hostile. They're also often associated with violent behavior, which we're going to talk more about in lesson 5. So methamphetamine, or meth for short, is similar in chemical structure and behavior to amphetamine, but it has a much stronger effect. Meth can easily be converted to crystals, which are then called ice because they look like little rock salt or ice chips. And these crystals are usually smoked or they can be injected. The lighted crystals are going to turn into a liquid and produce a vapor that can be inhaled, and then it's going to enter the bloodstream via the lungs, and it's going to rush to the drug to the brain to produce a fast, intense high. And then it's going to be followed by a very severe crash. Ice is particularly powerful since it's often a very high purity, and this is due to the difficulty of cutting additives and bulking agents with crystals. Ice is thought to be highly addicted since the body quickly develops a tolerance, and this is going to mean that there's more and more of a need to get the same effect. So long-term use can cause psychological problems like paranoia, hallucination, delusions, things of that nature. It's common in the US, but it's also used less frequently in the United Kingdom. In Hawaii, addiction to ice is growing fast. It's estimated that 10 to 15% of Hawaii's population of 1.25 million are users. So Dr. Andrew Overden of the University of Hawaii believes that the problem is in due part to social conditions like underemployment, inequality in education, difficulties with housing, etc. Some people have 2 or 3 jobs just to pay their way, he says. It's not hard to see the temptation of ice for them. In 2003, there was a large quantity of methamphetamine or ice that was seized by police in the Philippines. That's what's pictured here. And it was poured into a drum to be destroyed by burning. And just kind of so you can see a picture of what that looks like. Amphetamines, they're going to cause certain chemicals to be released within the central nervous system. That's the brain and the spinal cord. So, for example, the nerve endings are going to release noradrenaline. This is the chemical that increases the rate and the depth of our breathing, and it's going to raise blood pressure by constricting the blood vessels and tightening them by making them more narrow. Dopamine, this is the chemical that's naturally released in the body in response to any pleasurable experiences. So it's going to act as a chemical messenger, It's going to create vivid, positive memories of that pleasurable experience, and it's going to make the brain really eager to repeat that experience. And then when amphetamines are taken, more dopamine than usual is going to be released. So this is going to make the brain start to associate amphetamines with pleasure. And it's that sense of pleasure together with the feeling of energy and alertness that's making the amphetamine more attractive to some people. These users can stay up all night, they can work, they can study, they can talk or dance. They don't need to sleep or eat. They can get a lot done in that short space of time, and they're going to feel more cheerful and confident, like they can conquer the world. It sounds great, you would think, but what goes up has to come down. And coming down from amphetamine high can be very difficult. So you might remember from your science class that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So it might help to remember this when you're trying to understand how amphetamines affect people. All that extra energy that amphetamines seem to give is not really extra at all. It's merely borrowed from the body's natural energy sources. This means that when the effects wear off, the body needs to recover all the energy that's been squandered by the effects of the drug. And so coming down from the amphetamine high is going to leave that user feeling drained or wiped out. But as the effects wear off, people they start to feel lethargic to the point of exhaustion or depressed or tense. They may also experience mood swings and paranoia. And often people are tempted to repeat the dose more often in order to avoid those symptoms, and that can lead to a dependence on the drug. Amphetamine use increased as fashionable nightclubs allowed people to stay dancing into the early hours of the morning. It was a popular club drug. So, amphetamine use, both medical and recreational, it was fairly common in the 1950s and the early 60s in both the US and Great Britain. So, in the US, the Beats took amphetamines. The Beats were a group of writers and artists who felt that post war America was pretty much dull and boring. So, they took these amphetamines in hopes of feeling some sort of excitement or inspiration. In Britain, we have the suit and tie wearing, scooter riding mods, as they were called. They regularly took amphetamines so that they could stay awake to take advantage of all the new nightclubs that were popping up in these major cities. So, as other street drugs like marijuana and LSD became popular in the late 60s, amphetamine use starts to decline. But then it increases again in the 80s as the dance culture started to grow. So clubbers wanted to stay awake all night. And there was concern about the purity and the safety of some street ecstasy, which made amphetamines seem like the better option there. Today, although amphetamine use is not as widespread as it once was, recreational use has again become fairly popular. So we're going to look more closely at the possible reasons for that in lesson 4, including the low cost, the relative the relative small risk of overdose, and the drug's availability. They're easily made in these illegal laboratories in the country in which they're sold. We find these all over the place.